All right, recording has started.
All right. So I guess I should start by introducing myself. I'm Ian Frankel. I'm from Team 3926, the Emperors, as in the Penguins. And today I'll be leading a discussion that is going to be a strategic game analysis of the new Minne Trials game. I've looked at it a bit. So beginning of the meeting, hopefully we'll just kind of go over like the basics of what the game is, and then we'll hopefully have a bunch of different ideas floating around on the best ways to approach playing and competing in this game. Even if your team isn't, I think this has been said a lot of times, so even if your team isn't competing in Minne Trials, can still, obviously there's a lot to learn from and input into in this discussion. That I'll start by introducing the game. So the game's called Corn Conundrum. And so the way it's played is, so there's this field. And so the game pieces are these pieces of corn. So they're 2017 fuel, these wiffle balls that are zip tied together. I've made one with my collection of obtained game pieces from 3926's lab. So they have a little bit of flex to them, but they aren't like the most like flexible in the world. So that may be a challenge for teams, I think. This is kind of just like the most. Also, I think that it might be hard to, like, if you're trying to, for example, index one from this way and turning it, it may be a bit stiffer, although it also does have some segmentation to it. So that might be a fun challenge. So the way the game is played is does my mouse show up when I'm moving it around on the screen share?
Yes.
Okay. So the way the game is played is that there's a red alliance and a blue alliance. So there's a bunch of these normal corn cobs, and then these spoiled corn cobs, I believe they're called. They're painted black. And so normal corn cobs can be scored in each team's silo, which is they're each 36 inches tall. There's the red alliance silo here and the blue alliance silo. And then they can also, so teams can either pick up the corn cobs from the ground, figure out how to raise them up into their respective silos, or they can go to their feeder station. So the red feeder station is over here. There's an official term for what it's called that I do not remember. Grain elevator, maybe. Then there's another one over here for the blue lines, and each start with 8 of these cobs and then 8 spoiled cobs. I don't believe you can score spoiled cobs for points. They're only for the end game. So for autonomous, I'm just going to scroll down to the points grid. For autonomous, you score 6 points for each corn cob you score, and for teleop, you score 3 points for each corn cob, so it's just double. Then you get 5 points for leaving your barn during autonomous, 5 points for being in your barn at the end of the match, and then you get a ranking point if you have both of your robots in the barn and then also a spoiled cob. And then you also get a ranking point if you score 4 corn cobs in autonomous. You can hold 3 corn cobs at a time, and you also start with 2 preloaded, I believe. So that's the basic rundown of the game. I'll now open up the floor to people who have ideas about how this game will be played and such.
I have a quick question. What does it mean to have a spoiled corn cob? Does that mean in the barn zone or in your silo?
I believe it means to be in the barn zone. Burn zone at the end of the match.
Okay.
That's my interpretation as well. And I wonder if you have to have a robot holding it or it can just be on the ground. So I've been keeping track of, well, I will keep track of Q&A stuff and I can send them off to.
Yeah, I
the
think
folks
that
in
would be.
charge.
Is Jason's in the meeting today?
Oh, good question.
Because I know he sometimes attends these.
I think he just
So
left.
I should have kicked this off at the start here. Jason has signed up to have a Minne Trials Q&A on the 22nd. So we'll be having another talk about Minne Trials, but that'll be specifically for Q&A for Minne Trials. So anyway, but I think we should send these questions to him first.
And also, is there like with the spoiled corn cobs, like, is there like a point difference, like depending on how you point them or score them?
I don't believe you can score the spoiled corn cup, so that might be an interesting challenge for teams because if we look at the field, there's this is spoiled, this is spoiled, this is spoiled, this is spoiled, this is spoiled. So teams are going to have to figure out a way to avoid them while intaking. The one thing, at least, so there's also 8 spoiled cobs in the human player feeder station. I'm not quite sure why that number is so high. But considering there's seems to be only one thing you can do with them, so that's the only part of it that confuses me a bit.
Ian, I think it says that the spoiled cobs are with 0 points, but I don't think it says you can't score them.
So you can score them, but they're not worth any points.
Right, because I was expecting them to be negative points if you put them through your silo, but it looks like they're 0. So it doesn't. You can put as many through there as you want. So you probably don't need to avoid them, other than they just take up room inside your robot.
They take up room. Well, also because you're only allowed to hold 3 game pieces at once. Which
I thought there was probably like a penalty for like scoring, but that seems pretty interesting.
If there's a penalty, there'd be an interesting mechanic of like trying to score spoiled cobs in your opponent's silos. That would be cool. But so I don't think spoiled cobs, at least from the scoring grid, I'm not sure they do anything besides at the end game where you want one in your barn zone. And then some other things that I thought were important when I was doing my brief look at the game is that where you obtain corn cobs from the feeder station ramps, it's 24.6 inches to 29.5 inches high, and then the silos are 36 inches high. I'm trying to find the diagram of the silos.
And were you taking that measurement from the slot? Because for Nomothic, when we went over it, we were under the assumption that the corn is going on the top of it, which would only be 6 inches. So
assuming from where on this?
Yeah, we had assumed that it was going on the top of that right there, the lines.
Okay.
So I don't actually know which one is correct there though, or if both can be used.
It looks
I think
like
you're
Jason,
allowed to use the top part.
looks like Jason just joined. I don't know if Jason, if you want to do Q&A during this call or save the questions for 2 weeks from now.
I'll do some Q&A live. Certain questions I'll take back to the larger game design committee so we can discuss before. We just had a call because we realized we missed a whole section of the rules that changes one sizable portion about the grain elevator. So there's going to be a revision coming out tonight, but I'll tell you all about it here. And I'll send out an email to all the teams. But essentially, the reason that there's so many spoiled cobs is because when you enter game pieces from the grain elevator, every third cob needs to be a spoiled cob.
Okay, that
So,
That's really
yes.
interesting.
Yeah, so that is obviously a significant miss in the rules that we just realized. As we were trying to double check everything, we forgot to. We were trying to decide what section to put that in, and in the end, deleted it by mistake. So we'll get that in there with the wording tonight. But essentially, the intention is right. A robot can carry 3 cobs at a time. Spoiled cobs aren't worth any points when you score them in the silo. And so when you put cobs in from the grain elevator, every third one needs to be a spoiled cob. So you have the choice then to either accept that from the grain elevator into your robot, or take it and then ditch it. Somehow select it with vision, color sorter or some kind, and ditch it and grab another one out of the field, and then go score them all in the silo, or just score it, and just accept that if you're taking cobs from the grain elevator, since you have less of a challenge getting them at a higher height, that you only get 2/3 as many at a time.
So then when you are, just to clarify, so they'd have to drop it into the robot's loading mechanism specifically, or with intent to drop it into the robot's loading mechanism.
Yes. So, right, the intention is essentially anytime you go to the grain elevator to get pieces, if you're getting 3 pieces, one of them will be a spoiled cob.
Okay.
The wording on that is going to be a little tricky for me to write tonight, but I'm going to have
to
get that one worked out. I'm
So-
sure there will be some Q&A
Yeah,
questions about that.
I have a few Q&A questions, but that makes because I looked at the rule update with the 8 spoiled cobs in the feeder station, and I was just talking about how I was a bit confused about the one other question that Rasmus had. So, are we entering corn into the field from the slot or from above the slot on the grain elevator? Or are both options?
I'm going to punt on that one, and I'll answer it later on. I'll work it into the Q&A document and answer it probably tomorrow.
All right, sounds good.
The other comment I have so far is that Ian, I saw you flexing your cob earlier, your corn cob that you made, and yours is a little more curved than the ones that I've made, and has more flex. So you can expect it to be a little bit straighter, a little less flex, and we have some for each team. We just need to coordinate with each team getting them some cobs that we made, so that you can have them made in the same way that we made them with the same materials.
Yeah, I made this before I asked how tight the zip ties were, and so I did not crank down as difficult as I probably needed to. And
there are assembly instructions in the rules. I know that it's not perfect, right? It's hard to describe in 3D how to put this together, but I found that when you have one and you have the instructions, it's pretty clear how to assemble them. So, does that answer questions so far? Any other ones?
Were there any other questions that I missed?
One question I had was regarding the end game ranking point. What does it mean to have at least one spoiled cob?
Yeah, so Ian, can you scroll up to the zone names? Yeah, down one, right there. Right, so if we look at the barn zone, so at the end of the game, if both of your robots, in this case they're called tractors, and a spoiled cob are fully contained in your alliance's barn zone, you get the ranking point. It doesn't matter if it's in a robot, if it's on the ground, right? Both robots and at least one spoiled cob need to be fully contained within your barn zone to get the ranking point.
Jason, I have a question about corn. What happens if corn's broken?
So That's fine. I mean, ideally here we're not breaking corn at all, and robots that, like most FRC games, right? Robots that are consistently breaking corn, breaking cobs, will incur penalties. But if a cob breaks on its own, it's worth full points, right? And so the reason that cobs are worth 3 points is because there's 3 fuels making them up. So we'll just count the fuel parts.
So you can get 2 points for a broken cob if you
Yeah.
have 2/3 of it.
Yeah. But that makes it easier on the scorekeepers. So.
And I had another question, and I have a whole list of questions that I'm gonna wait with most of them for the Q&A. But one of the main ones that sort of came up when we were reading the game manual was how many total game pieces there are. Because let's see, I have it written down here. So in 3.7 and 3.4.1, we saw that there were different total numbers. Because in 3.7 it says there are 50 total corn cobs and 26 total spoiled ones. But in 4.1.1, it says 58 corn and 18 spoiled. So
yeah,
we were a little curious about how many total there were.
3.7 is correct. I missed 4.1.1 when I was applying the latest revision. So
Awesome.
I'll take that and write that down. Otherwise, Rasmus, if you have a whole list of questions, you can email them. And I've got a document going where I'll include all of the Q&A questions that people ask, just like First does, and then the answers on there. So I'll answer some before, as time allows, before the Q&A in 2 weeks, if you want answers sooner than that.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
I'll send that in tonight.
So then, are we ready to start? Oh yeah. To answer your question, Ken, I believe there's only one height of goals that you can score in, with it being the silo, and it's just 3 points in teleop or 6 points in autonomous. Where's the scoring? I should memorize like the numbers that the scoring grid correlate. 4.5 there. But basically, there's only one goal that's 36 inches tall.
The other thing that you can put stuff into is the bottom of the grain elevator, but that's only to facilitate a human taking it from the bottom and putting it into your robot through the top. Correct? I'm right on that, right? Somebody verify that?
Yeah. And so that's kind of like the mechanic of how it worked in 2022 in Rapid React. So I guess starting with the game analysis, what do we think the robots are most likely going to look like? Or I think we started in 2023 when we were analyzing Charged Up by discussing what we thought robots that would win events would look like. So what do we think the robots that will win Minne Trials this year will do in terms of cycle count, picking up from the ground, etc.? Something that's usually pretty interesting about Minne Trials is specifically that a lot of the robots don't have to be to the grade level that other robots have to be. Like I know that last year the winning alliance was KnightKrawler's B robot, which could only go up to the mid goal but could score 2 at a time, and our robot, which could only do like 2 or 3 cycles a match and only 1 at a time on a low goal.
And are we just sort of going over what some different traits of robots are? Is that accurate?
We're going to, I think we're like hypothesizing like what we think the competitive robots at the event will be.
Okay. Yeah, because for No Mythic, because I honestly I think this game is super cool. And we've already dived into strategy and all that, and it's been super fun. And so we've had the new students working with Minne Trials, and we're looking at some different robot profiles, and a consistent theme throughout there was that robots would be able to pick up 3 game pieces at once and be able to hold that max. So I feel like that will most likely be a competitive strategy here. Yeah, I guess what are the thoughts on that?
Yeah, our team is thinking that a winning robot will be able to do all 4 game pieces during auto themselves, because that's something that you can't necessarily rely on alliance partners for. You can pick up 2 off the ground pretty easily, cycle the 2 you start with, and there's the 4 for the ranking point, which will put you above most teams.
Yeah, that would definitely help with ranking. Last year, if I recall, no one got the autonomous ranking point in any match at Minne Trials last year, although I think there was only one team that scored any in autonomous to start with. So if you could get 4 scored in auto, you would be pretty set for the rest of the match.
I agree. I think that's a big one. The top high performing robots will be able to do auto, score an auto. That's a big one.
It's going to be interesting is figuring out how to coordinate autos so that 2 teams can score at once, specifically in timing, because that area where teams can score at in and at, I'm trying to scroll up to it. It's not very big. So teams are going to have to figure out how to make their autos different autos so that they can, if they want to score with another team, be able to do that.
I think we might see a similar pattern as in 2018. We're at a high level. You might have one robot taking a path that goes up and then left, and the other one goes left and then up. In this case, so that you're reaching there at a similar time, but from a different direction.
So I have a quick question. During autonomous and during the gameplay, the corn cobs are going to be pushed all over the place. Are you going to be able to enter your opponent's barn zone, or is that off limits completely?
I think that I haven't read the rules of penalties super well, but I'm pretty sure that if you're in your opponent's barn zone, you just can't contact an opponent's robot. So it's similar to like the charged up rules, with the communities and loading stations. Although without the extension penalties.
Is the barn included in that though? Because when we read the game manual, we thought that it was just the silo and the grain elevator with that safe zone.
I'm checking right now. Barn zones. Yeah, as of right now, it doesn't look like there's anything saying that you can't be in your opponent's barn zone.
Yeah, I did a quick search too. I didn't see anything in there. I suspect that if a rule is added about the barn zone, it'll only be for the end game. You have to stay there at the end game.
That's probably what we would see. I think in terms of that, we aren't going to see too much. One thing that'll be interesting is what alliances will look like, especially for teams that decide to pick up from the ground or decide to load from the feeder station.
I mean, you'd imagine it'd be one of both, so they're not getting in each other's way. I don't know.
Well, what's interesting is that last year, I think we saw robots, even going by like, the 2-4-8 or the 1-2-4-8 rule of percentiles, where especially in Minne Trials, I don't think we're going to see many robots get higher than 4 cycles a match. So if you only have one robot, because you can get 4 cycles from the feeder station before having to manually refill it. So I think that there might be a slot where if you have one feeder robot on an alliance, it can be really powerful.
I guess question: have any of y'all looked at shooting for an option? Because that was one of the strategies, or one of the routes that came up for No Mythic, is maybe having a robot at the feeder station that just shoots. I mean, it would be very tricky, but
I've drawn up a concept for a full court shooter bot for this game. I don't think there's anything in the rules that say you can't. I'm not sure
that if you miss, you get fouled all over the place.
Yeah, because you'd have to make sure you hit the backboard, because if you miss the backboard, then you'd be sending game pieces out of the field, which would be not great.
Yeah, our team thought about shooting for all of 5 seconds until we decided not to. One of the main reasons was that not all the cobs are going to be perfectly straight. They're not all going to be exactly the same in stiffness. It's just, I mean, even with the fuel in 2017, those were not accurate at all. You had to shoot a lot of them to make any shots, and I don't think these are going to be any easier than those.
Well, I think part of that was in 2017 it was a much further shot in terms of height, and a much smaller well, I guess the target's about the same size. One thing I will say is that I did go outside and I did throw this to see like how much of a straight line it would throw itself in. These do seem to follow normal-ish trajectories without wobbling too much, but I still think shooting might be, pretty difficult.
You also have the Scarecrow to contend with. You can't shoot very flat because you're just going to hit it in the middle.
So then we probably think that it's going to be a lot of different designs that, either pick up for the ground or, it's going to be driving up to it and placing it. So how do we think that we're going to see teams do that? Elevators or arms, or, even conveyors that elevate it from the loading station to the height of the game piece or the silo.
I feel like the intake into hopper mechanism, indexer mechanism, whatever your teams refer to that as, I feel like that's going to have to be sort of a pretty straight shot, because I worry about the corn cobs getting broken or getting jammed up. So I feel like they kind of have to come in and almost stay flat, or maybe gradually go up somehow. I think manipulating those corn cobs is going to be the tricky part of getting them from the floor to 36 inches.
Yeah, especially because, so I know I was like looking at the 2009, the Lunacy robots originally, because those had a similar, where the goal was at a height that is lower than the robot height, and you're intaking from the ground. And what seemed interesting with those is a lot of the indexers, that use belt runs, right? Because they're on the ground like this, right? Unless I guess you could get them upwards by putting compression on both sides and raising it up like that. But if you wanted to index it so it was going up like this, I think getting it to do a 90-degree bend is going to be pretty difficult.
Ian, I'm curious, why are you thinking about making it vertical? I know our team's just considering keeping it horizontal the whole time.
I think keeping it horizontal the whole time might be difficult in terms of just how long it is, and because it's not symmetrical, I could see, for example, if your motors aren't spinning at the exact right speed, it might, while you're trying to index it and raise it up, if it's a wide enough area, well, actually any area, right? If you're compressing it from just these two sides, it would potentially, flip and then fall down and jam.
Oh, are you talking about like a claw mechanism?
I was thinking like a belt run that would raise it up.
Yeah. We thought about belt runs and about, you have two options. Either you can keep it horizontal or it's difficult, or you keep it vertical and it's also difficult.
Yeah, I think
If
it's difficult.
The
Either way,
bend's gonna be
'cause
really nasty.
even if you provide compression from both of these sides, right, you get it all the way up, but then how'd you get it, horizontally projected for the last, 6 inches it needs to go into the scoring element? So that's going to be another thing teams are going to have to consider.
So one thing that I'm curious about is what are teams currently thinking about for intake, outtake mechanisms? I know ours, we're considering a mechanism a lot like the 2020 Every Bot, where you have horizontal rollers, a lot like 2017 ones, into a hopper. That's also your outtake. So you just raise that up on a one-stage elevator. But what are your teams doing? Lots of claws, more roller intakes?
KnightKrawler has our kickoff for this game on Wednesday next week, so we haven't really even gotten into the design phase. But I will say that KnightKrawler bought an enormous number of Star Wheels last year that we did not use. And so I would say high probability there will be Star Wheels on one of the two robots we bring. But that's just a guess since we haven't done any design at all.
Yeah, 3926 also isn't doing our kickoff until not this Thursday, but the Thursday after that, which we're starting pretty late because we're currently working on getting our MRI robot prepared because we're bringing a new robot to MRI. And so that's kind of our top priority. And then after that, we'll only be meeting 12 times before Minne Trials. So that's a little scary on our end. So we will probably be doing something that is simpler this year compared to what we attempted last year. Just due to that limitation, although we already have our drive base constructed, which is nice because we just decided we're just going to use the kit base that we already have in our lab and not construct a new one for the sake of time.
Yeah, that's how Hopkins does it. We, with the new members, once we do kickoff, we split into two teams, and then we provide each team a already driving kit of parts drivetrain. Electronics are on. There's code there. You can turn it on and drive it right now. So the focus is on building mechanisms and analyzing the game, and then go from there.
And then for Mythic, because we also haven't, or we had our kickoff, but haven't had our sort of like design strategies yet. But we also are using the kit chassis. Yeah.
Looking back on what happened in 2022, and I admit I didn't watch very many of those matches, but a lot of robots were bulldozers that pushed the game elements through the bottom and then were loaded on top by a human player. I was envisioning that we would probably end up seeing a lot of bots like that, but maybe not. Maybe that's not true, because when the balls come in, the corn cobs come in, you still have to raise it up so it's not as simple as just having a dump.
Well, at least the one robot I envisioned that would be able to do that without having to worry about manipulating the angles would be if it loaded into it and then it was like a belt run, basically, with compression on the top and bottom, right? That would basically, if it enters this part of the robot, it goes up the incline, because I think it only has to go up like 6 inches to a foot total, right? So then it's, you know, possible to do that where it's staying one orientation the whole time, and then just being able to directly feed from the station to the goal.
That's true, and also the nice thing about that is your human player could roll them down sideways as well, so they come in sideways and then they just roll up through, like you said, a belt run at an angle. So I guess maybe it is possible, because then you're basically building one mechanism, and it's a pretty simple mechanism. It's just a motor that is geared down, presumably, so it doesn't shoot them out. But
I mean, you'd have to get a pulley to get the top one, and, you know, reverse it, but that's not the most difficult thing in the world.
Right. So I think there's a good chance that we'll see a fair number of robots like that at the event. I think people may just run out of time, and honestly, I'm half contemplating with KnightKrawler saying, we're bringing 2 robots, but maybe we build 3 mechanisms, where we build that simple kind of dump mechanism isn't the right word, because you have to run it up, but we put a group of students saying, let's make this our emergency in case we don't get the more complicated one done.
That's what 3926 did for last year. So last year we had an intake claw mechanism that we were going to put on the robot, and in the end we had the passive stick mechanism that kind of went over the hoop and then pulled it back and then raised up onto it. It's really hard for me to describe unless you've seen it. But we had both those, and we were planning to do the claw mechanism. That ended up not being ready in time, like the rest of our robot, because we also ran out of time with our multi-stage elevator, and also just about everything else with that robot, which was so we ended up putting that passive mechanism, you know, on the second to last day, where we said this is what we're going to have to be able to live with, and it worked out fairly okay. So that was something that has definitely. And I'm interested in knowing how many teams have signed up this year so far.
Right now, we're anticipating 11 robots. 9 FRC teams that participate.
Jason, what would be your ideal number of robots?
Last year was 12 robots, and that was a great number. I think everyone got a good number of matches. The turnaround time was not too fast, not too slow. Lots of teams got to play in playoffs. So, you know, finding one more to slip in, it would be great. I think we're willing to go up to 14 or maybe even 16 before we start looking at adding Sunday back. So.
Okay.
Oh, so is it just the Saturday competition right now?
Correct.
Okay.
Back to the belt-driven robot archetype, where you have it just belted up to the scoring location. I know our freshmen were considering that pretty heavily at the beginning. And the people who were around for our 2020 robot, or in the off season, of course, were kind of going not super sure. So they took a good look at our 2020 robot, which is all belts. There's polycord everywhere, or polybelt everywhere, I think it's called. But the main issue there that we faced was indexing, because it's all fun and games when you're picking up 3 right in a row, but if you have no idea of where they are or how to space them out, especially with that game, the balls stuck to each other, The corn probably won't. It'll just roll off each other, but you still probably want a space. And so that's something, especially with the new rule that's coming up for the spoiled cobs, that could completely change that robot to be not so useful.
Yeah, that's true. That belt-driven system, if you want to be able to reject a cob, that's going to be that'll definitely raise the complexity.
What might be, and I'm not sure if this would constitute a loophole, Jason would have to tell me, is if you'd have, for example, one mechanism on the robot that you would load normal cobs into, and a separate mechanism on a robot that's specifically designed just for rejecting cobs. Like it might just even be like, a chute that leads out of the robot. And so when you're loading, you could load, right, the good cobs into one indexer and the bad cobs into a separate one, have that sort of be done manually. I don't know if that's considered like kind of a violation of the rules or a violation of the rules in spirit, though.
I actually kind of like that idea because now you have to build two indexers. I mean, I think there should be a rule. If there's not, that maybe there will be added. But I feel like when you load three cobs, all three have to make it inside your robot, so you can't sort of accidentally, quote unquote, miss the bad cob. So I think as long as it goes through your robot, how it went through your robot, I hope that doesn't matter as long as it goes through your robot in some way.
Because, I mean, then you could create something that's like as simple as a chute almost that just drops it onto the floor. And
you could, yeah. I mean, the other thing you could do is, especially if you're doing from the loader station with the belt feed, you could load a good one, you load a bad one, you back up, you reverse it a little bit, spit it out, go back in, load your third one, and then I guess you could load another one. So you could load three good cobs, and then every time you load a bad one, you just back up a little bit, spit it out to the side. So you wouldn't even have to build a separate indexer as long as the cob made it into your robot and your robot managed it and then released it. There would be ways you could do it with even a very simple mechanism. It just would be slow. It'd just take more time.
it would take more time, which would harm cycle counts, which I think this is a really unique and interesting way of doing almost a low goal versus high goal thing, where instead of it being low goal versus high goal, it's do you grab from the ground or do you grab from, somewhere else, which in essence is still a low goal, high goal because it's how high you have to transfer it. Where there's still definitely going to be that trade-off.
Yeah, and I guess the other trade-off of dumping it right there is you're dumping it right in front of your loading station, which is going to create a problem at some point.
So, Scott, you're talking about rejecting the bad corn cobs, but wasn't Jason saying that you need to score one of those bad corn cobs for each of the two good corn cobs? So
No, I think
not only do you want to reject, you might not want to reject them, but you want to be able to selectively score them.
Somebody else can correct me, but my understanding was that every third cob that goes through the loading station is bad. But I didn't get the impression that.
Oh, okay. I took that as every third one that was scored had to be.
Oh, can someone else clarify that? Or maybe Jason?
Yeah, I believe it's just every third one that goes through is bad.
Through the loading station.
Okay.
Yeah. So the intention, the spirit there is to make getting cobs from the grain elevator less efficient than getting them from the ground, right? Because only 2/3 of them are good, because you are getting it at a higher height, right? So it's all about loading. Nothing. There's no penalty for scoring the spoiled cobs, right? There's no penalty for rejecting them in some way. But yeah, this discussion about when do you reject it and when does it happen in the process is what I need to figure out in the wording, and I'm just need to think through the balancing of making sure that things are even for teams.
Another design that's very simple that might work well for teams that are willing to accept that they're only scoring 2/3 points is you just have a bucket sits beneath the chute. Game player puts 3 in. You drive over. It has like I would do a non-parallel 4-bar or something that just lifts the bucket up and tips it at the same time, dumping the 3 in, drive back, repeat throughout the match, and then you might have to bulldoze some into the bottom. You might not, depending how quick you are, but it's something to
mean-
consider at least.
Yeah, and especially because they're all, we're going back to tank era and it's under 10.5 feet a second. With that field, doing more than, 4 cycles a match might be, pretty tricky even, for the best spots at the event. So I'm at least, unless you have 2 bucket bots, right? Because, if you have an alliance with 2 bucket bots or 2 feeder station bots, then you run into issues, which might be interesting if the top teams at the event then, because I think the ideal alliance for point scoring would be, 1 floor bot and 1 feeder bot, potentially, like Isaac was saying earlier. But if there's only 3 floor bots at the event and the rest are feeder bots, then if you're the number 1 seed and you're a floor bot, you might pick another floor bot so that your 3 and 4 alliances end up with 2 bucket bots. And that could be an interesting trade-off discussion that happens when deciding who to pick.
Yeah, another thing that our team discussed was disadvantages of being a bucket bot versus disadvantages of being a floor bot. I mean, disadvantage of being a floor bot is it's more difficult. The disadvantage of a bucket bot is that you can only do it from the feeder station, but a floor bot can also do it from the feeder station. You just drop it on the floor and the floor bot picks it up. With the current design that we're leaning towards, you could do both feeder station and floor, which gives you the best of all worlds. But your cycle times are going to be a lot quicker if you're just backing up into cobs that are right next to your scoring location than if you're driving like the maximum distance across the field back to the feeder. So you might be able to double cycles that way if you're able to do floor.
That's a really interesting strategy with just dumping the corn cobs on the floor, because if you had a floor pickup bot and you had to go to the feeder station because you had cleaned up the field, you could put the 2 good corn cobs on the right and the bad spoiled cob on the left, which would make it easier for your floor bot to just pick up the good cobs.
Also, at that point, you've probably won the match, so picking up the bad cob too isn't going to hurt you too much.
That's true.
That point, it's going to be close to the end, and you need the bad cob in your.
If you've cleared the field,
That's
you've won
true.
the match in this
Yeah,
game.
if you've got a floor pickup bot, the need to separate probably is not nearly as important.
Because from our perspective too, when we went into the 2023 game, the first thing that we did was go straight for a floor bot, because we were thinking, well, if you can dump stuff on the floor and pick it up from any orientation, then you've just got an advantage over teams that can do it from the substation. It's not entirely true because cones are really hard, but if you could do like with cubes, it was absolutely true. If you could pick them up off the floor, you're just absolutely quicker than a team that could do it off the shelf. So, coming from that design choice, which we ended up going away from, in this game, it benefits you even more to just be able to pick up off the floor. Your cycle times are going to be just that much quicker if you're going half the distance.
Well, I think that also depends on team capability and how much time you're giving the team. Because, for example, if you have a floor bot and, with increased complexity, there's always the trade-off of you get less time to drive practice, you get less time to test mechanisms, which, in mini trials, assuming teams are only and obviously this is different from each team. 3926 is only planning on meeting 2 times a week throughout the season. We meet Thursdays and Fridays. And so because of that, right, when a team is limited on time and making something, more simple, it may be better for, in terms of what will cause the team to score best. I think we might see some teams that have really fine-tuned shelf bots or feeder station bots that will outperform some of the best low bots, unless we see a team, put 5 days a week into building their Minne Trials robot, and that would be an insane robot to watch. I would be very excited to see a fully fledged Minne Trials robot at some point in my life.
I agree. Our team's also only meeting 2 times a week, but we're going into this as more of like a challenge ourselves as much as possible. We don't really care how well we score because this is the time to fail
I
rather than
agree,
trying to
and that's
maximize score.
that's
So
definitely what 3926 did last year too,
it's like
and it was beneficial.
when the leadership team was meeting before Minne Trials kickoff, we talked a lot about balancing making a complicated robot that you learn a lot from the robot, or playing it like you would a normal season where you want to actually score well at the competition, because both can teach lessons. It's just which ones we wanted to teach. And in our case, we wanted to go for, okay, let's learn not to build a super complicated robot. If it goes wrong, if it goes right, then we learn how to build a super complicated robot and pull it off.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, and I talk about 3926's experience with Minne Trials last year a lot, but we went for we're going to have a 3-stage elevator that does high goal, and we're going to have a claw, and we've never done any of these things before. And, we have had that and I think it was good for us because I think we definitely learned a lot along the way. And it also, I think, allowed us to, understand where we were at better, because a lot of what is, building within your limits, I think the most difficult part of that is, because everyone FRC always says that, is knowing what your team's limits are, where, you don't get told what your limits are until you go to the competition and your robot doesn't work. And so for us, we kind of learned that our limits were not there. And, if we learned that our limits were there, we might have been more willing to, do a high goal robot this year. But instead, we are like, we know that our limits are at a low goal robot. And so we ended up doing that, it turned out to be pretty successful for us in the main season, which I'm glad about.
This does bring up, go ahead.
No, you should go. Go ahead.
This brings up an excellent point, just outside of Minne Trials too, like how teams are organized. I know 21-29 for like 3 years now. Each year we go, okay, here's our limits. We're just going to ignore those and try our hardest to build a really good robot. Well, not good, a really fun robot to design. Like last year we were like, well, we could do a horizontal or a diagonal elevator. That's not very fun. What if we did a double jointed arm instead and just worked like crazy, which is what we've done. And we've grown as designers and as a team, but it means that we also had to put in a ton of work. And if we hadn't have put in that much work, we wouldn't have done well at all. So in the case of Minne Trials, it's like you could push your limits and maybe work harder than you'd want to, or you could play it safe and just build something that is definitely within your limits, which, like I said earlier, it teaches a different lesson either way, but both equally valuable.
I have a question unrelated to goals. Thinking back to this year that these fuel is coming from, back to the Steamworks age, something unexpected happened that year that none of you experienced because you weren't around, that we did not anticipate. We did not anticipate the number of game elements that would pile up right in front of the place where you had to score. And I'm wondering if that's going to happen here. Ian, do you have a tape measure? How long is that fuel?
I have
Scott, it's 15 inches.
And the silo is 16 inches?
Yep.
So
if you're trying to score them horizontally, that's going to be really tricky.
Yeah, I wonder how much fuel is going to be sitting right in front of the silo.
I think we're going to see a lot, especially because teams, I don't think are going to, even last year for Minne Trials, there was a lot of dropped game pieces. And with almost every team not going to have, a lot of time to test and refine their mechanism. And, with it usually, because for all intents and purposes, Minne Trials usually plays out like a week 0 competition in some regards, where it's like, a lot of it's just the mechanisms are seeing its use for the first time ever. And so things aren't working as expected. So I think maybe in the finals matches we aren't going to see many, but in the matches, beforehand, we're going to see probably some piling up in there. And did robots get beached on these a lot in 2017? Or like
No.
no? So they
No,
just
They're big. They're big enough that, right? If you think about the wheels on a kit parts drivetrain are 6 inches, right? And these are 5-inch diameter. So the frame on the kit parts drivetrain is low enough that you're just going to end up pushing them around rather than driving up over them, except in extreme cases. So
okay.
that year for Steamworks, everybody's bumpers were basically riding the carpet because we had the gears, and the gears were only 2 inches tall. And so you didn't want to drive over the gears and get beached on those. So everybody had their bumpers really low.
yeah.
Another thing
So
that
to
just... Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
No,
Mason.
you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, to Scott's point, right? If you look at the field, right, especially around where you're scoring, there's some concave corners, right? And concave corners don't attract game pieces, but they hold game pieces, right? And so if you start to think about what's the field going to look like after auto, 30 seconds into teleop, a minute and a half into teleop, right? As we start endgame, what does the field look like? Where are game pieces? Where are robots, right? And think about how that's going to play out. That's something that I think teams don't think about until week 1 frequently, or at a week 0, and they start to see that. But the teams that are very competitive in FRC tend to look at that, right? Not just what is one robot going to do, but what will the field look like in terms of where robots are located, in terms of where game pieces are located throughout the match.
Another thing, and I think going to that point, I think what will be interesting to see is, how teams will figure out, am I going to make mechanisms so that it's easy for a partner to score at the same time as me? Or do you create a mechanism that, in terms of simplicity, you just plan on desynchronizing your cycles? Because it looks like it's only going to be easy for one robot to be scoring at any given moment.
Yeah, another thing that Scott made me think of is every team is going to be running tank drive as far as I'd expect. But I think a lot of teams are going to think of it as in you drive into the goal with the front of your robot touching the tube. But something that teams could think about is having the long edge of the robot, the side of it touching the tube, and then you score out the sides of your robot, which could make it easier to line up, because driving into the tube is easy, but you might miss with your angle or something and readjust. I think we saw similar things in 2019 with the cargo, I think they were called. And our team, like a few weeks before Minne Trials kickoff, we were just watching a whole bunch of robot reveal videos, as you do, and came across like Barker Redbacks in 2019, scored cargo horizontally out the sides of the robot, and were very effective with it. So that's something our team is kind of looking into right now.
Yeah, I think that would actually be really interesting if your entire mechanism was flipped horizontally. Then, of course, you'd have to drive in from the side and almost parallel park your robot near the scoring location, which has both, I think, advantages and disadvantages. What might be interesting, and I actually threw this out as a joke like a couple days ago, but I've been considering it more. I don't think it would be worthwhile, at least for 3926, to develop this, because we'd never use it in a main game, but because of the lack of bumpers and the lack of defense in Minne Trials, which kind of makes it more like an FTC game, Mechanim wheels might actually be successful in this game compared to everywhere else in FRC, where Mechanim tends to struggle a bit. Although, also, I'm not sure investing in Mechanim specifically for this would be a worthwhile use of team resources, especially if teams are already doing Swerve, which I think a lot of teams doing Minne Trials already are.
Also, Mechanim makes auto hard. It's just not fun.
Nothing is fun about mechanisms.
Well, presumably with April tags, mechanism should be easier. But so KnightKrawler sort of got famous before 2016 of doing mechanism every single year, and we stopped doing it because the accuracy in auto. But now with April tags, things get a little bit easier in terms of knowing where you are in the field. I'm not advocating to going back to that though, because you also can't play defense and people get pushed around and all that other negative downsides. Swerve's a much better option. But there's an interesting idea about mechanism. I mean, we have some old mechanism. We actually have a mechanism drive base from 2015 that it's just a drive base. You're making me think about that, but I don't even know. Those wheels are so heavy and so expensive. I don't know what that would do compared to cost. I suppose they're probably not more than $100 a piece, so they'd probably still be able to fit underneath your drivetrain cost.
And one thing for those who don't read all of the blogs from First, so First changed the April tag family compared to last year. So we're running the I forget which one we're on now.
36H11.
Yeah, which is what they started with, and they switched to 16H5, and now we're back to 36H11. So different April tags than during season last year.
Are teams doing mini trials going to be tracking the tags? I know our team's on the edge. Like, we want the new people to do most of the programming. We also want to test out our new April tag tracker. So we're probably going to do it and just not use the output and just log it.
Our team didn't last year. I guess from a game perspective, it doesn't, besides obviously aligning to the goal and odometry and autonomous, I think, for example, 2023, there was a lot of use for tracking April tags throughout the entire round because, obviously those robots that would do the auto trajectory generating on the fly where they'd say, we want to score, high in this node, and then just have the robot drive in the line and score automated. But for this one, having a good sense of odometry throughout the match might not be super useful in terms of what additional scoring capability is. Although I think it would still be a really fun challenge for new people if there's time for it.
I will also say that April tag tracking is one of the easier things to get into code with because at least our team's using Python for it. It's a really accessible start. The old vision tracking was even more accessible, but especially we're using the Aruco library within OpenCV, it makes it all pretty simple if you want to get new people involved with that.
Yeah, or even just using Photon Vision on a Raspberry Pi, or even just throwing on a limelight to the robot.
Yeah, I share everybody's thoughts on this where, we want mini trials to be mostly for new students, and complicated autos with April tags are a little bit too advanced for new students. But on the other hand, I've seen the April tags code that our build captain did last year as a freshman, and it didn't seem very advanced. And so we didn't do April tags last year at all. So this will be brand new for us, and I'm kind of tempted to let them do it since it's a brand new thing that they only tried over the summer. We'll see what our captains want to do. If they want to let our returning students try to do April tags code and have new students build the mechanisms, maybe that's not such a bad thing. It kind of goes back to what I think either Rasmus or Mason said, where we have to decide whether we want to try to push ourselves and try something we've never done before, and balance that with letting new students build the robots so they get experience.
Yeah, our team has found a balance in that I think we're going to let the existing people work with April tags and then just not use the output and code anywhere, log it, save those results for later so you can fine tune our April tag stuff. But it means that the new people are still writing all of the robot code and they don't have to use, 3D positions, that kind of thing. The April tag outputs, there's no fusing odometry with April tags. That's just pretty complicated stuff. So they'll still be writing the normal code, but it'll give us a chance close to the season to test out new April Tag software.
And I have a question here, actually. Because for no Mythic, how we're doing Turtle Trials, and we're only meeting once a week, which is gonna be a fun challenge. But we have only new students pretty much working on mini trials, and then we have returning students working on other off-season projects. So I'm a bit curious, like, are y'all having your whole team working on mini trials, just part of it? So like, what was that sort of balance looking like?
So 21-29, the way that we're doing it is we have just new people are making the decisions, prototyping, building the robot, and then we have the sort of like intermediate, probably going to take leadership next year type of people who are mentoring that team. So they're acting as subsystem leads in preparation for the future season. And then the like really advanced seniors, juniors are just completely hands off, and just kind of let them do what they want. And then we're working on other off-season projects, mostly fixing up our older robots.
For 3926, the way we're running it is going to be similar to the way we run our team in season, because I think in season we have a pretty heavy emphasis on training. So, for example, this year we're trying to have, at least on the code side, senior coders not ever be doing code alone without someone younger than them. And when there's someone younger than them, that person will, ideally be typing in and or replicating the code, which is something we've been doing, for a while, where older members of the team are expected to act, not just as team leads, but also mentors for the younger students. And that's partially, at least, and I'm mainly speaking from a code electrical perspective. Our build and CAD team has significantly more mentors consistently compared to our electrical code side. And so at least in terms of that, which is what I can really only speak for, it's been something that we try and make sure that all of our freshmen and new members to the team, basically we want them to participate in mini trials to the point where they are up to speed and ready to go the moment that kickoff happens. So it's kind of very loose, and we don't have like a set goal for what that looks like. But we want to make sure that they are actively participating in every discussion about how the robot is being built, how the robot's being coded, all of those things, and then also actively contributing. So, like, for example, we had the entire mini trials robot coded by freshmen last year, and that led our freshmen to be able to code, a really good auto balance code, and they did a vast majority of the code this year in season, and so it's kind of things like that where we use it as a training opportunity, and we kind of use it to do out that training instead of doing the training in season.
Isaac, do you want to share what KnightKrawler's plans are?
Yeah, for our what is it? Sorry, I zoned out for a second.
Oh, so we're talking about who's going to build the robot, who's going to, how our captains are going to be involved in the process, whether they're hands off or they're engaged, things like that.
Yeah, I believe our plan was the captains were going to be like mentors, just backing off and only really doing the training aspect. And then we would have returning members be the ones leading and doing the designing for the most part, with the newer members being or giving ideas, doing a lot of the like build assembling on code, like actually writing the code. And they would be doing, I guess, more it would be more like training to them. And then the newer or the returning students would be like, it would be more of an advanced training for them. And we kind of did this last year, although less structured.
Yeah. So we try to have our new members do most of the work, and we have our returning members act like captains, and our captains act like mentors, and our mentors stop people from hurting themselves.
Yeah, similar on 2039, right? But we split the team in two and try and get evenly sized and skill level teams, and then set a returning member who applied to be the lead for that Minne Trials team, right, as a way to train them in being a lead on the team or a captain in the future. And then everyone on our team is working on Minne Trials robots, right, to really get good interaction and engagement between new members and returning members, and build those connections now, because they're going to be the same one team come January.
Our programmers last year really didn't get involved with the robots hardly at all. I mean, it was tank drive, which is sort of works out of the box. I mean, doesn't take much at all to code a tank drive. We didn't do auto last year, and one robot had one mechanism, which was a motor, and then the other robot had a motor mechanism and a pneumatics mechanism, which for a programmer is maybe a total of 12 lines of code. So I think, and this year we have 19 students on the programming team, and I think 14 of them are brand new. So it would be nice if we could get them through training. We have a whole training process that we've been using for years, and most of the kids won't be done with their training by the first week of December. So it'll be interesting. We'll have to see. We may have some Rockstar students who have done some code already that could do turtle tests. Otherwise, we may have to lean on our returning students. But again, if our robots have one mechanism or maybe two simple mechanisms, it probably isn't going to matter. It's not much of a learning. The Ramis have a little bit more learning capacity than our Minne Trials robots did last year.
What do you think we'll see a lot of people do for endgame in this game? Because there is almost a risk reward of, I think, almost every match you want to ensure that you get that at least one ranking point, whether you win or lose. But you either have to, cycle to the loading station to load that before endgame. And so teams are going to have to almost figure out, the risk reward of how long do we wait to, or will teams put one in their barn almost like immediately when if for example, you're a human player station, a feeder robot, do you eject one there during your first cycle?
I think there's a good chance that they'll end up with just being a spoiled cob in the barn anyway, because there's so much corn in the field and the barn's so big.
Teams would be able to just push like the one that's nearby.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be rare that there's not a spoiled cob, because I think if you're driving back and forth, the corn's going to get pushed to the edges. And so I feel like it's going to be rare that there won't be a spoiled cob in the barn. I mean, I don't know, maybe not rare is not the right word, but half the time you might only have to park because there's a good chance there's going to be a spoiled cob in your barn already. But I feel like, to answer your specific question, Ian, if I was a drive coach, which I'm not, I would just tell people that as you're driving across the field, if you have a chance to push a spoiled cob into the barn, do it as you're driving across the field. Oh, that raises an interesting question. What is the concept of controlling game elements? Because if you're hurting by driving across the field, that could be interesting, that you might end up pushing 3 or 4 across the field just trying to go across the field with a full hopper of corn. And then you're in control. You know, a lot of games you would be in control if you pushed a game element all the way across the field.
Follow-up question to Ian's question. How easy do you think the end game ranking point is to achieve?
So for an Olympic, I think we just sort of took it as like we'll probably be able to achieve it every match if we have a somewhat consistent scoring mechanism. So for no mythic, I think we sort of said that it'll be definitely doable every match.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be on a scale of 1 to 10, very easy. I mean, I don't know, but 1 to 10, and I didn't even use a 1 to 10. I think it'll be very easy. Now, if you said you have to have a spoiled cob held by a robot, then I think that changes things, because now that's Ian's question of how long do you take to get across the field to load up corn to make sure you have a spoiled cob. I think that raises the level of complexity. But if it's just laying on the carpet, that doesn't sound hard to me. I feel like that should be achievable every match, as long as you don't have a disabled robot.
I think a lot of teams' goal is going to be for it to happen every single match. But I think it might be something similar to, like, for example, almost in this year where theoretically every single alliance should have been able to score the balance ranking point at the end of every single match, without, needing like a special mechanism or software. I guess you had to have an auto balance robot of the 3. But I think there was, a lot of matches where we didn't see that ranking point get achieved because, things weren't timed down to the last second. But like even last year in Minne Trials, where there was like a 10-point bonus, which was huge in that game for being just in one of your controlled zones at the end of the match. I know that there were a lot of matches that were decided because teams couldn't get back there in time. So that might be a know the rules kind of thing.
That's a good point. If you're not paying attention to the time, or you're not doing good time management, FTC's in games are almost always this exact same thing. Go park in your home base of whatever that might be for the year. And a lot of times it doesn't happen. So easy to achieve, yes. Will it happen? It sounds obvious that of course it'll happen, but if you don't manage your time well, then you're going to miss it. And yeah, that's true. I do see that happen a lot in FTC, even though it's the exact same mechanism, even though it's a simple thing to do. If you fail to manage your time properly, you miss it.
The other thing that I think teams may overestimate is reliability of robots during Minne Trials. If your robot is wired by brand new people, programmed by brand new people, designed by brand new people, it's probably not going to be 100% reliable. So it might be something to look at is, are you able to... Well, I suppose it would count, though. If the robot doesn't move at all during the match, it's in the barn at the end.
But if it gets disabled halfway through the match, then it isn't. And so in some ways, it's a reliability ranking point where it's like...
Yeah.
And we're doing no bumpers again, right? So pushing is not advisable if you don't have bumpers to push them back in the barn.
So our robot has bumpers, and this wasn't really intended for that, but it might be okay to just push him back in the barn. We had a match in 2023 where both of our robots were dead, and we just shoved one up on the charging station and balanced both of us and got the ranking point through that. It's pretty cool. So there might be repeats of that event at Minne Trials. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm a fan of the bumpers. If we get time to build them, last year we would not have we didn't have bumpers, and I don't think we would have had time to even build them had we wanted to have bumpers.
So Scott, because nobody put bumpers on last year, I called out in the rules. Reminder, they don't have to be FRC legal bumpers. They can just be pool noodles taped to your frame.
Or just plywood, just to protect
Yeah.
your robot, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean-
not a bad idea. I think I'm going to advocate for us to do bumpers this year. I don't know. We'll see. It depends on how much time we have. As things go, you get to the end and you're trying to make things just work.
I think that just doing pool noodles taped to the frame, or even if that's like an available option that's like handed out at the event, would be something that'd be cool. Just
But you
because,
still have to fit in your 36-inch box.
oh yeah, it still has to fit in the 36-inch box.
So keep that in
Yeah,
mind.
but kit parts drivetrains aren't 36 by 36. You'd have to intentionally build it to be bigger, you know, or your mechanism sticks out pretty far on one side. So, looking at robots last year, everyone could have taped pool noodles on their robot and still been in the size box.
That's not true.
Was
KnightKrawler was right at the limit, front and back. We could have put him on the side, but
Yeah, I
don't
think
we could have put him
3926 was also, we were near the limit front and back wise, but we could have put them on 3 sides at least.
Yeah, and it's not an all or nothing. You can selectively put. So, something to think about. Some teams will want them. Some teams won't care.
Well, Ian, we got about 5 minutes here. Do you want to do anything to wrap this out?
If anybody has any closing thoughts about the game that we didn't get to, I think it's going to be a really interesting game this year where there's a lot of unique trade-offs.
The other aspect that I think teams should consider is driver awareness and quality. I mean, you have to have rotating drivers all the time, and without bumper colors or anything, it might be hard to remember which robots are on your team and which ones are against you. And even with no defense, it's kind of like, who am I working with here? So it's a very moving target. You have no idea how good your driver or your teammate's driver is going to be that game.
That's
And I think
definitely.
despite having a perfect robot, it might be worth to just have everybody get a chance to drive the robot. Especially like if you have a list of people that you're bringing to the event, make sure that all of them have driven it a couple times.
Yeah, that's definitely something we noticed last year because we didn't finish our robot until the night before the event. Everyone went in with at most 5 minutes of drive practice. A lot of people were driving it for the first time in the match and we're figuring out, how do I score at this? And that meant there was a lot of matches where we only got 1 cycle or 2 cycles the entire match, which was, something that is very difficult to consider because, unless you're forcing everyone on the team to read the manual, you're going to have drivers who haven't read the manual and don't know they have to get in the barn at the end of the match. Unless you have a way of actually making sure they know that, right? There's going to be a lot of, at least from our experience, there was a lot of, because of the nature of, trying to get everyone driving, which I think is really good. It's almost like if you want that to be something you focus on, to have a well-driven robot, you want to try and get I guess that's the same in normal FRC where you want to get your robot done early and then do drive practice. I don't know if 3926 is going to have the ability to do that this year. I'd hope we do, but I think there's even more time needed to schedule in for that than expected.
I think another thing that would be highly beneficial to teams, and I don't know if somebody wants to make this, but a rules test. A lot like we use the Citrus Circuits one in season, As soon as they post that, we have everybody take that and just make sure that they know the rules well enough to start designing a robot. Might be worthwhile to do, especially before the event. Make sure all of your drivers know, like, that it's not battle bots. That kind of thing. So they know the rules. They know that you can only pick up 3. A Google form would do that perfectly.
Also, I have one last question that came from what you two were saying about alliances. Because I remember last year, New Mythic ended up putting on like some little Velcro flags for denoting alliance color. And I might have missed it in the rules, but is there a way of denoting alliance, like which alliance robots are on, or is that just like matches?
Everybody has to have LEDs on their robot. No, I think we did like a red and blue piece of bumper fabric hung on the robot. I think last year. You do have to have some way to denote it, right?
Yeah, I thought it was in the rules somewhere.
Yeah, I think it is, but it's pretty easy to miss. I know we missed it last year and ended up using my physics homework and some Sharpied in things as the flags, and it really definitely helped that my physics teacher was the team coach.
I think just like some flags stapled to sticks. Like I know last year we had little pieces of Velcro we stuck on there, but just like taping a flag on with like some Scotch tape before each match, like honestly, you could even like make some for the event, just like to have their extra. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be a good opportunity for a team to increase relationships. Is show up with bumper materials, flags to show alliance color, and a rules test. That would really put you a knock above if you have that for all the teams there.
All right. Any last minute thought? Oh, go ahead, Jason.
If someone makes a rules test, I'll link it or send it out.
Oh yeah, great idea. You guys can all come back on the 22nd and brag about how you got a perfect score.
I know I made one last year for my team, although at least from what we do is our rule tests are generally a lot simpler compared to the Citrus Circuits rule test. I tried giving our team the Citrus Circuits rules test this year, and there were mass complaints on account of everybody failing. I think I was the only person who passed, which, as the person everyone on the team goes to for the rule manual citations, made me sad. But then I decided we usually make a more simple rule manual where it's like the general things people have to know, like how many points is X, Y, and Z worth? Is this a thing you can do? So, for example, last year, there were a lot of teams that didn't know you got 10 points, for parking in your zone at the end of the match for zoned out. And that was, a big thing where I think our first match, our robot wasn't able to be on the field, but we still won it because our alliance partner knew to park in the zone at the end of the match, and neither of our opponent's robots knew that because it was the beginning of the day and they hadn't read the rule manual. And so we kind of just somehow won that match by that default. And I think that kind of highlights the importance of making sure everyone has read and understands the rules fully.
Ian, in response to your everybody failing the Citrus rules test, from our team's experience, what we do is we have sort of like open notes. So the open notes is the rule manual. You can read it as you're taking the test, because that gives you the extra skill of just kind of knowing where stuff is in the rule manual, because you're going to be referring to that a lot while designing.
I think that actually might be a better way of doing it, because in that case, then it's not necessarily memorizing the rules. It's almost the rule test. You're reading the rules, the entire rule manual over the process of doing the rule test.
Yeah, we also make it like a community thing, so you can help each other out on it, which I think has boosted our knowledge of the rules significantly.
All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this meeting. I certainly did. We're going to come back on the 22nd. We'll do a Q&A, Minne Trials, and probably spend some of that meeting also kind of giving an update of where we are for those that are building robots, and how things are going, things that they're maybe running into that didn't expect. So that'll be exciting. If anyone's willing to share their design or photos, that would be cool too. But we'll dedicate the 22nd again to Minne Trials. And then I don't know if we have anything on the schedule for next week. I didn't look ahead. But there's a reminder that it's an open calendar from here until May, or maybe longer. So if you're interested in hosting a conversation, giving a presentation, anything you want to do, there in the email that I send out every week, there's a link to the Jot forms or the survey something or other. So you can go out there and fill out, I want to host a talk or give a presentation on such a date. I'm super, super appreciative of Ian for hosting tonight. It's really great when someone else takes the lead and keeps the conversation going. So I really appreciate you guys for doing that. All right. If that's it for tonight, then I guess I will see everybody next week. Good night.
Good night, guys.